After 20 years on the force and 15 as chief of police in a busy metropolitan area, I was ready for a change. The constant pressure, the politics, the endless parade of human suffering, it all took a toll. But more than anything, I wanted a better life for my son, Ethan. At 14, he had already endured more than most will in a lifetime. A rare degenerative muscle condition diagnosed when he was 4 had gradually robbed him of his ability to walk, but never his spirit. When the opportunity came to transfer to the quieter Oak Ridge County Police Department as their new chief, it felt like divine intervention. Better hours, less stress, and a beautiful suburban community called Sycamore Heights that promised excellent schools and accessible facilities for Ethan. The kind of place where kids played outside until dusk and neighbors brought welcome baskets. At least, that was what the brochure promised. Moving day arrived on a perfect spring morning. Sunshine spilled across manicured lawns as our moving truck rumbled down Maple Avenue. I remember watching Ethan's face as we turned into the driveway of our new single-story home. His eyes lit up at the sight of the wide, smooth sidewalks perfect for his wheelchair. The house itself had been a lucky find, already equipped with ramps and wider doorways from a previous owner. Ethan's specialized wheelchair was more than just mobility equipment. Custom built to accommodate his specific needs, it represented freedom. The lightweight carbon fiber frame, special cushioning to prevent pressure sores, and motorized assistance for when his arms tired. It had cost nearly $30,000 after years of fighting with insurance. When Ethan was in that chair, he was not disabled in his mind. He was simply Ethan, a bright, curious teenager who loved science and video games. The first week in our new home passed in a pleasant blur. Neighbors stopped by to introduce themselves. The Johnsons from next door brought homemade cookies. The elderly couple across the street, the Wilsons, offered to show us around the community center. Several families with children Ethan's age extended invitations to backyard barbecues. I began to relax, thinking perhaps we had found our place at last. I kept my profession quiet initially, not out of secrecy, but from a desire to be known as simply Ethan's dad rather than the police chief in our personal lives. After years of being defined by my badge, it felt freeing to just be myself. I planned to make the proper introductions at work once I officially started in 2 weeks. It was on our 9th day there that I first noticed her. A woman in her 50s with an immaculately styled blonde bob, expensive athleisure wear, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She stood on the sidewalk across from our house, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing our property with obvious disapproval. When she saw me watching, she gave a tight little wave before making a note and walking away. Later that afternoon, I found a welcome packet in our mailbox. Welcome to Sycamore Heights. Please familiarize yourself with the HOA guidelines enclosed. Patricia Winters, HOA President. The packet contained 37 pages of rules and regulations governing everything from approved mailbox designs to permitted shades of exterior paint. Something about the sheer volume of restrictions made my stomach tighten slightly. That evening, as Ethan and I sat on our front porch watching the neighborhood children play, I noticed Patricia again. She stood beneath a maple tree across the street, phone raised, apparently taking photos of our house. When our eyes met, she lowered the phone and walked briskly away. I dismissed the uneasy feeling that crept up my spine. After all, we had found our sanctuary at last. What could possibly go wrong? The first direct confrontation came exactly 2 weeks after we moved in. It was a Saturday morning, and Ethan and I were enjoying breakfast on our front porch. The doorbell rang with an insistent, repeated chiming that immediately set my nerves on edge. On our doorstep stood Patricia Winters, clipboard clutched to her chest, a plastered smile that resembled a grimace more than a greeting. "Good morning," she said, her voice syrupy sweet yet somehow cold. I am Patricia Winters, HOA president. We met briefly when you moved in. Her eyes drifted past me to where Ethan sat in his wheelchair behind me. Something flickered across her face, a momentary tightening around her eyes before she continued. I am here for your first property compliance check. I blinked, confused. I was not aware we had scheduled an inspection. Patricia's manicured finger tapped against her clipboard. Oh, all new residents receive a courtesy inspection within the first month, just to ensure everything is up to community standards. Her gaze again flicked to Ethan's wheelchair, now positioned near our front window. For instance, I notice you have been leaving equipment on your front porch. Section 12, paragraph 4 of our covenant clearly states that no storage of personal items is permitted in visible areas. That is not stored equipment, I explained patiently. That is my son's wheelchair. He often sits on the porch, and it is easier to leave it there temporarily when he goes inside. Nevertheless, she persisted, it gives an untidy appearance to the neighborhood aesthetic. Perhaps you could store it in your garage when not in active use. She emphasized active use, with a peculiar inflection that made my jaw tighten. Behind me, I heard Ethan shift uncomfortably. I kept my voice level. I will review the covenant, but I can assure you my son needs ready access to his mobility equipment. The following week brought 3 separate violation notices. Our garbage bins had been left at the curb 3 hours past the designated retrieval time. Our lawn was 0.25 inches above regulation height. The garden hose beside our house was not on an approved hose reel. Each notice was signed with Patricia's flowing signature and included potential fine amounts that seemed wildly disproportionate to the infractions. As I tried to balance settling into my new role as Oak Ridge County Police Chief with managing these petty complaints, I began to feel a constant low-level stress. I made every effort to comply with the more reasonable requests, installing the approved mailbox design and repainting our front door from unauthorized navy to Sycamore Heights Blue 5. One evening, as I was raking leaves, careful to bag them in the approved biodegradable lawn bags, our neighbor Tom Johnson leaned over the fence. I see Patricia has welcomed you to the neighborhood, he said with a grimace. Is she always this thorough? I asked. Tom looked around before lowering his voice. Between us, she tends to focus on certain households, especially those she considers different. The Singh family across the street got similar treatment when they moved in last year, and the lesbian couple on Elm Street, they finally moved out after 6 months of harassment disguised as rule enforcement. That night I discovered something that broke my heart. While cleaning Ethan's room, I found several crumpled violation notices hidden beneath his bed. When confronted, he admitted Patricia had handed them to him directly when I was at work, all related to his wheelchair being visible from the street. I did not want to cause trouble, Dad, he said quietly. I know how much you wanted this to work out. The following morning, a certified letter arrived. Patricia had scheduled a formal property inspection for the following week, citing multiple instances of noncompliance. As I held the letter, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. We had barely unpacked, and already our sanctuary was feeling like anything but. The community center conference room felt unnecessarily cold as the monthly HOA meeting came to order. I had attended out of curiosity, wanting to better understand how this organization operated. Ethan had insisted on coming along, saying he wanted to see democracy in action for a school project. He sat beside me, headphones around his neck, a notebook open on his lap. Patricia Winters presided at the front of the room like a judge at a criminal trial. 5 other board members flanked her, their expressions ranging from bored to mildly uncomfortable. About 20 residents filled the folding chairs, most looking as though they would rather be anywhere else. And now, we move to new business, Patricia announced after 40 minutes of discussing lawn fertilizer schedules and the unauthorized wind chimes at 342 Birch Lane. We have a serious compliance issue at 127 Maple Avenue. With a jolt, I realized she was referring to our address. Beside me, Ethan straightened in his wheelchair. The new residents, Patricia continued, clicking to a new slide in her presentation, have repeatedly violated Section 12, Paragraph 4 regarding storage of equipment in visible areas. To my horror, the screen filled with a photograph of our house, clearly taken without our knowledge, with Ethan's wheelchair positioned on the front porch. The timestamp showed it had been taken while we were inside having dinner. As you can see, Patricia said, using a laser pointer to circle the wheelchair, this equipment is regularly left in plain view, disrupting neighborhood aesthetics. She clicked again, showing multiple photos taken over several days, all featuring Ethan's wheelchair from different angles. Heat rose to my face as I raised my hand. May I address this issue? Patricia seemed momentarily thrown by my request, but nodded curtly. I stood, conscious of Ethan looking up at me with anxiety clear in his eyes. That is not equipment being stored. That is a medically necessary mobility device for my son, who has a degenerative muscle condition. We sometimes leave it on the porch briefly when he goes inside, as it is difficult and painful for him to maneuver it through doorways unnecessarily. Several neighbors nodded sympathetically. An elderly woman in the front row made a soft noise of distress at Patricia's characterization. "While I sympathize with your situation," Patricia responded, not sounding sympathetic in the slightest, "rules are rules. Medical equipment, gardening equipment, sports equipment, all must be stored out of sight. Otherwise, we risk property values declining as the neighborhood appearance deteriorates." "You cannot be serious," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. "This is not a basketball hoop or a lawnmower. This is essential medical equipment. Perhaps you should consider a community better suited to your special needs," Patricia suggested, her voice dripping with false concern. Several gasps echoed through the room. An older gentleman stood up. "Patricia, this is going too far. The boy needs his wheelchair. Surely we can make an exception." "If we make one exception, we have to make them all," she countered smoothly. "Next, someone will want to park their RV in the driveway or install an unauthorized satellite dish. Where does it end?" The meeting devolved into heated discussion. Several neighbors spoke in our defense, but Patricia skillfully steered the conversation back to property values and community standards. When it came time to vote on issuing a formal violation, I watched in disbelief as the motion passed 4-2, with only 2 board members brave enough to vote against Patricia. As we left the meeting, several neighbors approached to offer quiet support. "Do not worry," whispered Mrs. Wilson, the elderly woman from across the street. "She does this to everyone she does not like. Stay strong." The formal violation notice arrived the next morning, printed on official HOA letterhead. Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in a fine of $100 per day until the violation is remediated. At the bottom, a handwritten note from Patricia. "Perhaps a storage shed in your backyard would be a suitable solution for your equipment needs." That night, Ethan and I sat at our dinner table in uncomfortable silence. His wheelchair, now tucked awkwardly in our narrow hallway, created a bottleneck that we both had to squeeze past. The physical intrusion mirrored the emotional one. Our private family matter had become public neighborhood debate. "Dad," Ethan finally broke the silence, pushing his pasta around his plate. Maybe we should just move again. Find somewhere without an HOA. The resignation in his young voice broke something in me. After everything he had endured, countless surgeries, painful physical therapy, the loss of his mother to cancer 3 years earlier, he was again ready to sacrifice his comfort for the sake of peace. "No," I said firmly. "This is our home now. We will not be driven out by unreasonable rules." What I did not say was that I was beginning to formulate a plan. If Patricia Winters wanted to play by the rules, we would too, just not the ones she expected. I had never worked night shift since becoming a police chief, but with understaffing at the department, I occasionally filled in to show solidarity with my officers. That Thursday night was one such occasion. The shift had been mercifully quiet, a few traffic stops, a minor fender bender, a call about teenagers making noise at the park. I was in my cruiser completing paperwork when my phone rang at 9:47 p.m. Seeing Ethan's name on the screen immediately sent my heart racing. "Ethan, is everything okay?" I asked, already putting the cruiser in drive. His voice came through breathless, panicked. "Dad, they are here, in our backyard. They are taking my wheelchair." "What? Who is there?" I demanded, flipping on my lights but not the siren as I accelerated. "Mrs. Winters and 2 men from the HOA board." I left my chair on the back patio while I went to get a snack. When I looked out the window, they were wheeling it away. They said it was abandoned property and they are confiscating it. Ice flooded my veins. "Ethan, listen carefully. Do not confront them. Stay inside, lock the doors, and call 911. Tell them exactly what is happening." "I already tried to stop them," he said, his voice cracking. "I went out on the porch and told them they could not take it. Mrs. Winters said I had violated the final notice, and they were authorized to remove nuisance items. Dad, I am recording them on my phone, but they will not stop." I was now driving well over the speed limit, thankful for the empty streets. "I am 10 minutes away. Keep recording but stay safe." What happened next I heard through the phone and later watched on Ethan's video. The sound of the sliding glass door opening. Ethan's voice, uncharacteristically loud. "Please stop. That is my wheelchair. I need it to move around." Patricia's voice, cold and official. "This equipment has been left in violation of covenant restrictions multiple times. You received final notice and failed to comply. We are removing it as authorized under Section 18 of the HOA agreement your father signed." "But I need it." Ethan's voice rose in desperation. "Where are you taking it?" "It will be held at the community storage facility until your father pays the accumulated fines and provides a written plan for proper storage going forward," one of the men explained, sounding uncomfortable but determined. The video showed Patricia directing the 2 men as they awkwardly maneuvered the wheelchair down the patio steps. One man clearly had no idea how to properly handle it, causing the front wheels to catch on the bottom step. There was a sickening crack as part of the frame bent, and the specialized cushion fell to the ground. "You broke it," Ethan cried out. "That cost thousands of dollars." "Perhaps you should have thought of that before leaving it outside," Patricia responded dismissively. "I know your type, always wanting special treatment, expecting the rules to bend for you." I heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath at those words. The camera shook as he steadied himself against the door frame, no longer having his wheelchair for support. "My dad is the police chief," he said, in a last desperate attempt to stop them. "He will not let you do this." Patricia's laugh was sharp and disbelieving. "The handyman. Nice try, young man. Your father told everyone he works in public service. Now go back inside before you hurt yourself." By the time I screeched into our driveway, heart hammering against my ribs, they were gone. The back gate stood open, the patio empty except for Ethan, who had made his way outside and was sitting on the steps, illuminated by the harsh porch light. Tears streaked his face as he looked up at me, more vulnerable than I had seen him in years. "They took it, Dad," he whispered as I rushed to his side. "I could not stop them." I gathered him into my arms, feeling the tremors running through his body. At 14, he was too old to be carried easily, but in that moment I would have carried him to the ends of the earth. Carefully, I helped him back inside to the couch, professional training warring with parental rage. "Show me the video," I said once he was settled. The footage was worse than I had imagined. Patricia's smug certainty, the callous handling of medical equipment, the dismissive way they spoke to my son, all of it burned into my mind like acid. But it was the moment the wheelchair frame cracked that sent white-hot fury coursing through me. That wheelchair represented Ethan's independence, his dignity, his ability to navigate the world on his terms. "I am so sorry, Dad," Ethan said quietly as the video ended. "I should have brought it inside right away." "No," I said firmly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. This is not your fault." I called the station immediately, reporting a theft and property damage. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol officers arrived, officers who worked under my command but had never been to my home before. I watched understanding dawn on their faces as they realized their chief's son was the victim. That night, after giving statements and filing initial reports, after helping Ethan navigate the humiliating process of getting around our home without his chair, after finally getting him to sleep in the early hours of the morning, I sat at our kitchen table staring at the wall. The rage had crystallized into something colder and more focused. Patricia Winters had no idea who she had decided to target. She thought we were an easy mark, a single father and his disabled son, newcomers she could bully into compliance or drive away. What she did not know was that she had just stolen from the wrong family, and I was about to show her exactly why. Morning found me at the dining room table, transformed into a command center of sorts. My laptop open, printer humming, documents spread across the surface in neat stacks. My badge and service weapon rested beside my coffee cup, a visual reminder of who I was and the responsibility that came with it. I had slept perhaps 2 hours, but adrenaline and purpose kept fatigue at bay. Ethan had been forced to take a day off school. Without his wheelchair, he was effectively trapped in our home. I had carried him to the bathroom, helped him dress, and settled him on the couch with books and his laptop. The humiliation in his eyes when I had to help him with basic tasks he had managed independently for years fueled my determination. My first call had been to the station, informing them I would be taking personal leave for several days. The next was to Officer Rivera, requesting she accompany me to retrieve Ethan's wheelchair. The community storage facility manager blanched when we arrived, badges displayed. "I was told this was authorized by the HOA," he stammered, leading us to where the wheelchair had been carelessly dumped in a corner. My heart sank at the sight. The frame was visibly bent, one wheel misaligned, the specialized cushioning torn. This was not just property damage, it was the deliberate disabling of medical equipment. Officer Rivera photographed everything, her face grim with professional indignation. "Sir," she said quietly, "this constitutes several potential charges beyond simple property damage." Back home, with the damaged wheelchair propped in our living room as evidence, I began my methodical investigation. First, the documentation, all HOA correspondence, violation notices, emails from Patricia, the covenant we had signed. I highlighted Section 18, which Patricia had cited as giving her authority to remove abandoned property. The actual language referred to items left on common areas, not private backyards. By noon, I had initiated a formal police report for theft, property damage, harassment, and potential violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. By 2 p.m., I had spoken with the district attorney's office about whether this constituted a hate crime against a disabled minor. By 4, I had contacted 3 wheelchair suppliers for emergency replacement options. But this was just the beginning. Years of police work had taught me to look deeper, to find patterns. Patricia's targeting of Ethan's wheelchair seemed too personal, too deliberate to be mere rule enforcement. That evening, I began knocking on doors. The elderly Wilsons welcomed me in immediately, eager to share their experiences. "She forced the Ramirez family out last year," Mrs. Wilson confided. "Their son had autism and would sometimes rock and hum in their front yard. Patricia claimed it was disturbing the peace and fined them repeatedly." Mr. Singh from across the street had similar stories. "When we first moved in, she complained about cooking smells from our kitchen, called it environmental pollution, and tried to restrict when we could prepare our traditional foods." House after house, the pattern emerged. Anyone different, racially, religiously, physically, became targets for Patricia's special brand of harassment. Most disturbing were the accounts from former board members who had resigned in protest over her leadership style. "She rules through intimidation," explained former treasurer David Cohen. "I left the board when I discovered she was directing landscaping contracts to her brother's company at inflated rates. When I questioned it, she threatened to expose my son's minor drug charge from college." I sat at my kitchen table that night, drafting careful notes as Ethan watched from the doorway, supporting himself against the wall. I had rented a standard wheelchair as a temporary solution, but it was ill-fitting and uncomfortable for his condition. "What are you going to do, Dad?" he asked quietly. I looked up, seeing not just my son but every victim of Patricia's tyranny. "Something I should have done from the beginning. I am going to build a case, methodically and by the book, and then I am going to make sure she never harms another person in this community." The next 3 days were a flurry of activity. I gained access to HOA financial records through official channels, discovering irregularities that suggested years of financial mismanagement. Contracts awarded without competitive bidding. Unexplained withdrawals categorized vaguely as community improvements with no corresponding work completed. Personal expenses, a spa weekend, restaurant meals, even clothing, charged to the HOA credit card. I gathered statements from over 20 residents detailing patterns of selective enforcement and intimidation. I consulted with the county's ADA compliance officer about Patricia's actions toward Ethan. I requested and received surveillance footage from neighbors' security cameras showing Patricia and her board members entering our property without permission. Throughout this process, Ethan watched me with growing understanding. One night, as I reviewed documents at midnight, he wheeled himself into the dining room in the uncomfortable rental chair. "This is not just about my wheelchair anymore, is it?" he asked perceptively. I looked at my son, so wise beyond his 14 years, and shook my head. "No, son. This is about justice for everyone she has hurt. Sometimes, being in law enforcement means protecting people from those who abuse power, not just from those who break obvious laws." As I organized the evidence into a comprehensive case file, I felt no satisfaction, only resolve. Patricia Winters had picked the wrong family to bully, and she was about to learn that some lines should never be crossed. The community center parking lot filled quickly that evening. Word had spread about the emergency HOA meeting I had called, authorized by a seldom-used bylaw allowing residents to convene with sufficient signatures, signatures I had collected methodically over the previous days. Pia. Plea arrived early, an unusual occurrence for typically sparsely attended HOA meetings. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that something significant was about to happen. I arrived deliberately last, parking my official police vehicle prominently near the entrance. Beside me sat Ethan in his temporary wheelchair, his face solemn but determined. Behind us came 3 patrol cars, from which uniformed officers emerged carrying boxes of evidence and a projector setup. Their presence sent an immediate ripple through the gathering crowd. Patricia stood near the podium, confusion and irritation warring on her face as she watched the officers set up equipment. She had tried to block this meeting through procedural objections, but the overwhelming resident support had forced her hand. When she spotted me in uniform, something flickered in her eyes, the first glimmer of understanding that she might have miscalculated. "Chief Evans," she said, her voice artificially pleasant as I approached. "This seems rather official for a simple HOA meeting." "This stopped being simple the moment you decided to steal medical equipment from a disabled child, Mrs. Winters," I replied quietly, just for her ears. "Please take a seat. The meeting is about to begin." The room fell silent as I took my place at the podium, Ethan positioned beside me. I had deliberately chosen not to wear my uniform during previous encounters, but tonight I stood before them as both a father and the chief of police of Oak Ridge County. "Good evening," I began. "For those who do not know me yet, I am Michael Evans, recently appointed chief of police for Oak Ridge County, and more importantly, father to Ethan Evans." I gestured to my son. "Many of you witnessed what happened at last month's meeting, where it was decided that my son's wheelchair violated community aesthetic standards." Murmurs rippled through the audience. I continued, my voice steady. "What you did not witness was what happened 6 days ago, when Mrs. Winters and 2 board members entered our property without permission and removed my son's $30,000 specialized wheelchair, causing significant damage in the process." I nodded to Officer Rivera, who started the video recording from Ethan's phone on the large projector screen. The room watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded, Patricia's dismissive comments, the mishandling of the wheelchair, the audible crack as it broke, and most damning of all, her statement, "I know your type, always wanting special treatment." When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Patricia stood up, face flushed. "That was HOA property enforcement, completely authorized under our—" "Mrs. Winters," I interrupted calmly, "I advise you to consider your next words very carefully. You are currently under investigation for theft, destruction of property, harassment, and potential violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." I signaled to the officers, who began distributing packets to every person in the room. "What you are receiving is a summary of a 3-day investigation into HOA practices under Mrs. Winters' leadership. You will find documented evidence of selective rule enforcement targeting minorities, elderly residents, and families with disabled members." The room erupted in conversation as people began flipping through the packets. I raised my hand for silence. More concerning are the financial discrepancies. I clicked to the next slide, displaying a spreadsheet of suspicious transactions. Over the past 4 years, approximately $247,000 of HOA funds have been directed to companies owned by Mrs. Winters' family members, often at rates 30–40% above market value. Additionally, Personal expenses totaling $23,475 were charged to the HOA credit card. Patricia's face had drained of color. "This is slander. You have no authority to." "I have every authority," I stated firmly. "Financial fraud exceeding $10,000 is a felony in this state. 2 officers are currently executing a search warrant for HOA financial records." As if on cue, the back doors opened, and 2 more officers entered, carrying boxes of documents seized from Patricia's home office. The timing was not coincidental. I had coordinated this operation with precision born of years in law enforcement. One elderly resident stood up, voice quavering with emotion. She threatened to put a lien on my house because my late husband's service flag violated the flag display policy. I have been afraid to even speak at meetings for years. This opened the floodgates. One after another, residents stood to share their experiences of intimidation and selective enforcement. With each testimony, Patricia seemed to physically shrink, her confident posture collapsing as her power visibly drained away. The final moment came when 2 officers wheeled in Ethan's damaged wheelchair, now tagged as evidence. The room fell silent at the sight of the bent frame and torn cushioning. "This," I said quietly, "is what happens when rules become more important than people, when power becomes more important than purpose." I looked directly at Patricia, whose expression had shifted from defiance to dawning horror. "Mrs. Winters, you are not under arrest at this time, though that remains a possibility pending the completion of our investigation. Officers will now escort you from the premises, as the board will be voting on your immediate removal from the HOA presidency." As the officers approached her, Patricia finally seemed to understand the gravity of her situation. The community she had ruled through fear for years was witnessing her downfall, orchestrated not by an ordinary resident she could intimidate, but by someone who understood the law better than she did. There was no satisfaction in watching her escorted out, only the solemn knowledge that justice, while sometimes slow, was finally being served. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, each day bringing small but significant changes to our community. Spring blossomed into summer, and with it came a rebirth of sorts for Sycamore Heights. The transformation was as much about the people as it was about the place itself. The legal proceedings against Patricia moved forward with methodical precision. She ultimately accepted a plea agreement rather than face trial, agreeing to full restitution of misappropriated funds, community service, and probation. The financial investigation had uncovered even more extensive fraud than initially suspected. The money recovered from her accounts was returned to the HOA treasury, where it belonged. More meaningful than her legal punishment was the community's healing. The interim board, elected the night of Patricia's removal, immediately suspended the most restrictive and arbitrary rules. A committee was formed to rewrite the covenant entirely, with a focus on community well-being rather than property values alone. I declined a nomination to join the board, feeling my role as police chief made that inappropriate, but Ethan eagerly accepted a position on the Youth Advisory Committee. The most touching moment came 3 weeks after that fateful meeting. I returned home from work to find our driveway filled with cars and our front yard crowded with neighbors. At first, I feared something was wrong, but the smiles that greeted me told a different story. Mrs. Wilson stepped forward, a large envelope in her weathered hands. "Chief Evans," she said formally, though her eyes twinkled, "on behalf of the residents of Sycamore Heights, we would like to present something to Ethan." From behind the crowd emerged Tom Johnson and Mr. Singh, wheeling forward something covered with a blue sheet. Ethan, who had been watching from the porch, went completely still. "We took up a collection," Mrs. Wilson explained. "Everyone contributed what they could. The medical supply company gave us a discount when they heard the story." The sheet was pulled away to reveal a brand new wheelchair, not just a replacement, but an upgrade to the latest model with enhanced features for Ethan's specific condition. The carbon fiber frame gleamed in the afternoon sun, the cushioning designed for maximum comfort and support. A small plaque affixed to the back reads simply, "For Ethan, from your neighbors." Ethan's face as he examined his new chair, as neighbors helped him transfer into it and showed him the features they had specifically requested with his needs in mind. That moment crystallized everything I had hoped our move to this community could be. That evening, after the impromptu celebration had wound down and neighbors had returned to their homes, Ethan and I sat on our front porch, his new wheelchair positioned proudly beside him rather than hidden away. Across the street, the Wilsons waved cheerfully as they walked their small dog. Children played freely on the sidewalks without fearful parents checking for covenant violations. "Dad," Ethan said thoughtfully, "do you think we would have the same neighbors if Mrs. Winters had not taken my wheelchair?" I considered his question carefully. "We would have had the same people living around us," I answered. "But neighbors, real neighbors who care for each other, that might have taken much longer to discover." As twilight settled over Sycamore Heights, I realized we had found something more valuable than the peaceful sanctuary I had initially sought. We had found a community where differences were not merely tolerated but valued, where rules existed to protect, not control, where an act meant to harm had instead revealed the fundamental goodness in people. Sometimes justice is not just about consequences for wrongdoing, but about building something better in the aftermath. And in that, we had succeeded beyond measure.